It's Natasha Watkins, your favorite realtor, and we are back again. Today, we have something a little bit different for you. I'm going to introduce you to Latoya Allen, who is the founder of ACES. And you're going to ask yourself, what is ACES? Well, we went through the process ourselves. When you're out there shopping, buying a home and everything like that, one of the things that you don't think about is the school process and how to get into those school systems. So I've just brought someone with me to educate you guys on independent schools. How's it going, Latoya?
It's going well. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here talking with you today.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming in. How was the drive in? I know it's a little bit far.
It was okay. You know, look, it's Long Island and LIE. While it's not my friend, it was okay. Music got me here.
Awesome. I totally understand that. So, like I was saying before, last year we got involved in the whole independent school process. And as an immigrant, and I think I was telling this story earlier, you know, when my mom first got to America, I feel like the education for each one of us got a little bit better. Like, for example, I went to public school, and then later on in high school, then I went to Cardinal Hayes, was a Catholic school. My sister went to Catholic school. And then we kind of say that my youngest of both of us had the best education because she went to an independent school in Connecticut, where she was around some of the top people, top kids around the world. I think one of her classmates, her father owned the Giants, and that exposure to so many different things, I think, just gave her a notch up in education. So when it came to my daughter, I wanted to make sure that we could supply the same thing for her as well. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in the process?
Yes, absolutely. So, similar to you, I am an immigrant. I was born in Jamaica and immigrated to the country when I was 7 years old.
Okay.
And typical to immigrant families, my father actually was like, okay, you're going to the public school down the street.
Yeah,
and so I
100%.
went to the public school down the street. And so public school educated in New York City. And then while I was in college, I was working, I had a summer job, and
Okay.
I met a family, had wonderful kids, and we were just chatting with the kids. And they sort of introduced me to independent school because their kids went to an independent school.
Okay.
And here I am now. I became like their weekend babysitter, and I'm speaking with the kids. You know, I love children, and at the time I was in college studying education. So I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I knew I wanted to go into education. And then as I'm talking with them, they're talking about independent schools. And I was like, wait, you mean like the public school or you mean like Catholic school? And they're like, no. Independent schools. I'm like, what is that? And so I was in college when I learned about independent school.
Oh, wow.
And here I am one night working on my assignments and talking about trying to go work in the DOE. And this family says to me, well, you know, there are 3 independent schools in the Bronx, and you live in the Bronx. You should check them out. And I was like, okay. And I just started to do a little research. And back then, the research was, 411, and you got the phone number and you call the school. I'm dating myself a little bit here.
Oh, I'm right along with you. I can relate.
And so as I was trying to find a teaching job, she said, why don't you contact these schools? And I remember getting the fax number and faxing my resume because there was no internet to email. So I sent my resume to 3 independent schools, and one of them called me back.
Okay.
And this is the part where ACES was born, but in a sense where, to me, why I love ACES and what I do, because I, again, immigrated to this country when I was 7 years old. So I'm in college, and at this point, I'm like 21.
Okay.
And I'm driving to this independent school in the Bronx. Mind you, I lived in the Bronx, and I got lost. I got lost because I could not find it. This particular independent school that I worked at, it's like, in a sense, was hidden.
Yeah.
And I remember calling them like, I'm lost, can you? And they're like, everyone gets lost, it's okay. And they talked me to get there. And I pulled in, I would say after driving through the forest, I pulled in this beautiful campus. I'm like, this is a school? And then my eyes was just immediately opened. And that is where the journey of this independent schools and learning about independent schools started for me in college.
Like she said her eyes got open. The first time I walked into, I want to say the first school that we visited was at, we don't want to talk about Chapin. Was that Chapin? We toured each floor, and every single floor that I went through, I got more and more amazed. Their science lab, their music rooms, the different things that these kids are exposed to, it's just mind-boggling, definitely. Can you tell us a little bit about how ACES came about, like how that all started?
So that eye-opening experience, my first day on a campus, I was hired as a substitute teacher. And so
Okay.
I worked there for a year and just under really good leadership and learned about the school and was asking questions. Again, every day I was the girl with this wonder eyes, like, wow, wow, and talking to more teachers and educators that were there.
Yeah.
And then I started working there full time. I graduated. That was my senior year. I graduated, and then they hired me to be an assistant teacher.
Okay.
And so now I'm working, and instead of being a substitute teacher now, I'm an assistant teacher, and I'm working with a head teacher, and we're talking curriculum, and
Okay.
I'm asking questions now. I've just graduated college, so I'm like, oh, like I can write a lesson plan, and now I'm all in, right? You're just young and just ready to jump in, and like, yes, and just seeing how the curriculum was unfolding and the autonomy that teachers at independent schools have, along with a guided so like curriculum map that independent schools have
Yeah.
for every grade level. I just fell in love with education.
Okay.
And what I knew education to be, what I thought education to be, versus where some of my friends was talking about how, you know, in other systems, and I'm not here to bash public school
Okay.
or any other school system, Cal school, anything at all. I just was seeing the difference between how their lesson plan was unfolding and sort of
Okay.
like a scripted, so like how they had to prepare the kids for certain exams at the end of
Yeah.
the year. Whereas in independent schools, there aren't any state exam at the end of the year. So the teaching and the curriculum and how it unfolds can look very different.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and one thing that I was kind of amazed as well too is that when you mentioned that autonomy, I find that autonomy trickles down into the students as well. The way that they think is totally different. Like I feel like when we go to public school and even Catholic school to some aspects, they teach you how to take instruction, how to work at a job. When I think at the independent schools, and my daughter just went to her first camp, they teach them how to actually think and how to problem solve. Am I correct on that?
Creative thinking is definitely at the top for most independent schools. Anything you read, they would talk about the love of learning, for kids to love learning, for the kids to have agency over their learning, and critical thinking is what they are establishing and having children to question,
Yeah.
right? Question what you're learning,
Yeah.
have conversation, have discourse in your learning. And so that's one of the things that struck me about independent school that I enjoyed. So here I am working at this independent school as a classroom teacher.
Okay.
And then I remember the first time there was a big group of parents walked around and came into the classroom. And I'm like, what is this? Again, I'm so new to it. Like, every day my eyes is open up, and they was like, oh, that's an admission tour. And I'm like, an admission tour?
Okay.
Like, what's an admission tour? What's happening? And parents are touring the schools and visiting various schools as they will be applying their child to independent schools. So I was like, oh, so to come to this school, they were like, oh, there's an application process, there's interviews, and interviews, they call it interview, but it's really conversations as you're meeting the admission team and personnel into the school. And so again, year after year, it was like, it's such an interesting process, and how parents are discovering and researching the schools for their children. And so after, again, being in the classroom, then I started working in the admission office and understanding the process of independent schools and finding out that there are so many independent schools, that these independent schools have been around for hundreds of years, some of them. And what I say is that they were hidden in plain sight for me, right? And I realized as I started to work in the admission office now, and I'm talking to more families and talking to families in my community, right? If I'm at church or I'm at an an event with a friend, they're like, wait, what school do you work at? What's that independent school? And back in the days, I have to say, they were called private schools, right?
Yeah.
So that word private school, independent, you say independent schools now, and parents are like, what's an independent school? So the word private school and independent schools can be used interchangeably.
Got it. Yeah.
And then the name independent was changed, and it's sort of like the current title. So not as to sound so elitist, as part of it. But that's where I think when you say independent school, for some parents, they're like, what is that? But if you say private school,
it makes
they'll
more
equate
sense.
That it makes more sense for them.
Definitely. So we're going to get into like the whole administration process because it's a whole big to do. But I think one of the things that I appreciated was that you prepare minority parents for this whole process, which is a whole to do, and we're going to get into that. Can you tell us how does ACEs play a part in that preparation?
So one of the big piece for me as I started ACES was because, one, again, I'm going through this independence. I worked in independent schools. I'm meeting families who aren't aware about the independent school admission process.
Okay.
And then in all those years that life went by, I had my daughter.
Yes.
And then I went through the process as a parent to apply her to an independent school. And so now I have the admission experience both from a practical and theory, right? As a parent who've just gone through the process.
Yeah.
And then now as someone who works in the school. So I'm at church one day and someone was like, what school does she go to? And I'm talking about it. And as more as I'm talking about independent schools, I see more parents coming around
Start to
me,
gather
right?
around, yeah.
And they start to gather, and it's the lack of information and how to access and to navigate this process that I've realized that Black and brown families aren't aware of.
Yes.
And we're not in communities and circles that are talking about independent schools and talking about, well, here's what you do, here's who you contact, here's sort of like the first step, here's the second step. We aren't in circles that are having that conversation.
No, we're not.
So there's this lack of knowledge. So when I created ACES, and ACES stands for Admission Consultant and Educational Services.
Okay.
And I always said knowledge. So the three sort of like pillars of ACES is knowledge, access, relationship. Because once you have that knowledge and someone teaches you how to do something, you're able to then access, whatever sort of like door you want to open.
Definitely.
So the knowledge part isn't critical, and explaining to parents, the steps of applying to independent schools. It's daunting, especially
Lord. Daunting is an understatement. My college application was not as challenging as my daughter's kindergarten's application. And I think one of the biggest barrier, and thank you so much for all the calls and everything and all the support and everything that ACES provide. Because ACES is not just here to help you and tell you a couple of things. It is now it's a community. Like we just did, the little play date with all the kids and everything like that. So it's not just one section. You come in, you do a little thing. They help you through the whole process, and she's here holding your hands, definitely.
And that's really what it is about, holding your hand. As I went through this process that parents are going through. So whenever parents are applying to independent schools, I say, I was with you. I had to write my parent family statement. And I remember coming home one day and said, okay, I think it's in a good place. I had my deadline date on my calendar. I would come home, put my daughter to bed because she was in her nursery school, and say, okay, today I want to finish up the parent statement. Today I want to submit the application the next day. And then there's a whole financial aid process, right?
Yes.
So we'll get there. So that's a whole nother piece. But when we talk about the knowledge of independent schools and the access to it, right? The minute families hear the tuition, or they hear about an independent school, and they go to the website, and they see the cost of an independent school education, and they're like, oh, no, thank you. This is not for me.
Yes.
And I'm here to say, yes, it is for you.
100%.
Right? Yes, it is for you. Because families close the door because they don't have the information. They don't have the knowledge to know that these independent schools offer a tremendous amount of financial aid. And financial aid, you don't have to pay back. That's another piece.
Yes.
Because I had a family, again, when you don't have the information, said, But if I get financial aid for independent school, that takes away from the financial aid that my child will get for college. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. These are two separate worlds. These are two separate things. And so they call it financial aid, but it's a financial aid. You don't have to pay it back. It's not a grant. It's not a loan. It is a financial aid award to make going to independent school accessible for your family, because diversity and socioeconomic diversity is important to independent schools.
Yeah. So, especially with it being the year that it is, and we're not going to get into anything political or anything like that. But for me, DEI is not a dirty word. Diversity, equity, inclusion. And do not let people make you feel like if it's a dirty word at all. Because not to say that my daughter is DEI or isn't DEI, but I think open up diversity, having different mentalities of way different people think and different things like that only make businesses stronger. And you want to be part of these conversations. You want to be part of these schools, because I feel personally these are where the future leaders are coming from.
I completely agree with you. If we took the word DEI out the picture, I just need folks to understand that it is important for everyone to be having cross-cultural conversations.
100%.
Your entire circle should be diverse, right? Imagine if women were only talking to women and not having conversation with men. Imagine if, we weren't having conversation with other people from even we're from the Caribbean, but from different parts of the Caribbean, right? Yeah. We learn so much about each other with all of our different sort of like labels that come along with
100%.
us. So children should have the same experience as well.
Yeah.
And as adults, we should have the same. We should be open to meeting new people, trying new foods. Imagine if you ate the same thing all the time, every day.
Oh my gosh.
Right? So you should diversify the foods you eat.
100%, 100%.
Just think about diversity in that way, is that the more you try new things, the more you engage, the more you have conversation, you're learning. It's a learning experience.
100%, 100%. One of the things I think that scares people from the independent schools as well is that it's predominantly, white, And I think one of the conversations, like my sister, she went to a private school as well. And I can see how that kind of affected her. And one of the reasons why we chose the school that we did was because of that effort towards diversity and that effort towards hearing everybody's voice. How do you think that the independent schools are addressing that issue in terms of minorities coming in and them feeling more welcome?
So I always tell my families, independent schools were created by white people for white people. So let's go back to the history of them, right? That's really where we are, if we want to go back to the history of independent schools. That being said, in 2024, our worlds look different. Right?
100%.
And these independent schools are making sure that their schools are diverse, because they understand also they're going to look at their curriculum and making sure that their curriculum and what they're teaching our children prepares them for the future. They understand so much that how do we prepare great kids for the future is to make sure they are in community with a diverse group of students.
Yeah.
Right? And so there are independent schools that understand the importance of making sure children are seen and belong, and that if we are going to have a school with children and families from diverse background, we need to create that space in the community.
Yeah.
Now, I'll also say that there are some independent schools that have started this work years ago, right? And there's a spectrum, I would say. There are more deep in sort of like their diversity work that they're doing with families, right?
Yeah.
There are independent schools that would take more quote unquote like risk, in terms of their diversity work. And there are some independent schools that are treading a little lightly, right? For whatever reason, things like that. So we can talk about that, right? But I also feel like there's a lot of independent schools out there that are serious about making sure children are seen and heard and have a space and walk on walk into on campus or in their schools and feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest things and why we made the decision that we made in terms of the school that we picked was the community that's around it as well. Like for us, the school that we're sending my daughter to, they have a very diverse in terms of African American or Black community where they brought us together and had us relate to each other and even gave us a quote, for lack of a better term, kind of like a sponsor, someone to teach us a little bit about the school and everything like that as well. So they are doing the work. The other follow-up question for those schools that haven't gotten there yet, how should parents, if they are into this school, interested in this school, but they haven't gotten to that place where they're completely diverse, how do they navigate that school?
So I always tell parents when you interview and you go into schools, you want to ask about the curriculum. You want to ask about the curriculum. You want to look around to see the children and who's in the community. So even when you talked about, the school that your daughter's attending, where you had an opportunity to connect with families prior to being admitted to the school and prior to going to the school. They made an effort to reach out to make sure that you were able to connect with families that look like you, right? And so that I think there are those questions that you may want to ask someone else versus a parent that's currently in the school that you would not ask the administration.
Okay.
So I always tell parents, you want to do your homework on that sense to make sure that there is a community that you can be real and ask questions where you feel a sense that you are comfortable. I always tell parents, you are not going to these schools to code switch and to be anyone than your true self. And 100%. We don't want your children to do that at all.
Okay.
Right? We want your children to show up and be their authentic selves in an independent school. And so there are some schools, like I said, that needs to be pushed in that area, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And I'm all for pushing some schools in that area. I'm all for parents being really honest and saying to the school, I love this school, I love your curriculum, but I'm concerned that my child will be the only child of color in this class. And that should not be in 2024.
Okay.
That should not be in 2024.
100%. Yeah. But there always has to be a first too, though.
Yes, and I say you can get a first 2 or first 3.
100%. Okay? I agree with you.
There's a first 2 or first 3.
I definitely agree with you.
That's an intentional admission office. That's an intentional admission office. Say we love this family, and here's a family that we want to admit, but there will be the only one, and we can't do that. So we need to dig a little deeper to make sure that we are going to admit more than just one family. Yeah. And that's what I mean about some schools just being intentional in that way.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Let's talk about a little bit about the admissions process. Oh gosh. Look, Chris, she got on my nerves, but I am so grateful. I'm 100% grateful for her because I don't think that I could have done it by myself. I spoke to other dads. We are 100% grateful for the women in our lives because we could not do these things 100%. Tell us a little bit about the admission process, early admissions, when you have to get those essays in, the questions. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the admission season starts typically early August and will conclude, say, March for New York, because every state has different timelines. But from New York, that is the timeline. Applications open. Some applications will open as early as August. And then there are deadlines in which applications close. So applications open and they close at a certain point. Yeah. So you have to complete the application within that time frame. After you've completed the application, there is an interview and or play date. Now, we say interview, it sounds so formal. It's really a conversation. It's literally a conversation like we're having today. And it's how the school gets to know your family. Yeah. They want to get to know you. They want to get to know your child. And so the interview / play group is where if you're applying to, say, kindergarten, where children will come together, they're reading a story, they're learning. They're reading a story and they're learning and admissions office are getting a sense of their academic readiness skills. And then they meet with the parents as well. And that's an opportunity for parents to have conversations with the school,
Yeah.
whoever you're meeting with, and to ask about the school. I always say when you go in for your interview, you're interviewing them just as well as they're interviewing you.
Yep.
Be completely comfortable asking your questions. Be completely comfortable making sure that this is a school that you can see your child and your family. I always say, they're asking you questions to get a sense to know you and to see if this is a family they want in their school. And you're saying, well, do I like you too? Do I like you? Do I want to be here? So, I tell my families to go into these interviews prepared with questions. You've done your research and have these conversations.
Okay.
And then there are also the data points of an admissions application. So some schools will require some sort of admission testing, right? Not so much for the younger kindergarten grades, but if you're applying to older grades and middle school and high school, absolutely. And then there's a school report where your current school, your current teacher will have to complete. And again, that's just them getting another data point to get a sense of who your child is and their social, emotional, and their academic skill set.
Yeah. I wanted to touch on that one. So Chris thought she was smart. She buttered up our school teacher. She got her a little Starbucks card so she could get her little Starbucks coffee. And I think one of the conversations that we had on one of the Zoom calls was that one of the hardest part is to get the teachers that she's currently in to get those paperworks in.
So I always, I encourage that a little bit when you said Chris gave the little Starbucks card. Just listen, my grandmother would always say, you will always catch more bees with honey than you will with vinegar.
Yep.
Right? That's one. And two, the school report is long. It's lengthy. And you're asking a current teacher to do something that is outside of her 9 to 5, right? We appreciate those nursery school directors and other schools, teachers who will complete the school report because it is long and it's tedious. And sometimes these teachers are doing that on their own personal time, right? They've taught your child. They're either doing that in the evening, completing the school report in the evening, or they're doing it after work. And so I just say just a gift of appreciation. Thank you so much for taking the time to being thoughtful and to just complete this for us. Because if you don't, if the teacher does not submit the school report, your file is incomplete. And if your application is incomplete, the independent schools you're applying to will not review your application.
Yeah, and those deadlines are strict.
And the deadlines are strict. And so, yes, I think a gift of appreciation to say thank you when you've done this process. Go get a coffee, go get something. And just know that I appreciate you for taking the time because it is tedious. A school report, if someone is being really intentional, if an educator is being intentional in completing a kindergarten school report, it's going to take them about an hour.
So you assessed it, Ava. What are some of the things that you look for when you're assessing a child to get ready?
So academic readiness skills, right? In terms of pre-reading, right? Letters, sounds, and also we talk about that critical thinking piece, right?
Okay.
Expressive and receptive language. If I asked you a question, are you going to answer that question back to me with the appropriate response? And in terms of they're open-ended, right? There's a bunch of open-ended questions we ask just to see sort of their mental, what they're thinking. So again, it's just that critical thinking. There are some academic readiness skills that are teachable that we try to get a sense of, right?
Got it.
So you want to get a sense of those teachable skills, but you want to get a sense of their critical thinking, executive functioning, that's big. Self-control. That self-regulation and things like that. So, and that differs for grade levels. So what we expect to see once we're doing an ACEs assessment for a child that's applying to kindergarten varies for a child that's applying to pre-K versus a child that's applying to 5th grade or 6th grade.
Definitely.
So depends on their academic grade that they're applying to. There's different skill set that we're looking for during our assessment.
And can you tell us a little bit about the entry points? So
that's another piece. As independent schools, the big entry point is always kindergarten. So kindergarten is a big entry point. For some schools, pre-K is their entry point.
Okay.
Right? Not all schools have a pre-K entry, but some schools do. So it is an entry point for some of them. Kindergarten is a big entry point. Sixth grade is a big entry point, and ninth grade. So sixth grade typically would start middle school, dependent on the school. Some schools, their middle school starts in fifth. Ninth grade is a big entry point as well.
Okay.
And then there are always off entry points. We call them attrition. Those
Okay.
are like your second grade, your third grade, your fourth grade.
Uh-huh.
That attrition, because another thing with independent schools are thoughtful and careful about their student-teacher ratio.
Okay.
And so when you go through the independent school admission process and they have a kindergarten class that's set, in order for someone to say, okay, I want to apply to first grade, someone has to leave kindergarten to open up a spot for first grade.
Yeah.
Because when they admit a class, their intention is that class is going to be with them until graduation.
Yeah.
And some of these independent schools, you graduate in eighth grade because those are the K to 8 independent schools. And then you have K to 12 independent schools. And then you even have some independent schools that are like nursery to 12 or nursery through 8. So there's definitely different grade range available in independent schools.
Awesome. All right. And then, my big thing was all girls schools versus co-eds, or all boys schools as well, because not everyone is
Right.
lucky to have a daughter,
The
but still.
single-gender schools.
Yes, the single gender schools versus the co-ed schools.
It is education and research. When families are buying a home, right, they may come to you and said, we are looking for a 4-bedroom, colonial, different sides of home. As a realtor, you're going to say, okay, listen to them. And I'm sure you're going to show them different forms of home, right? When someone comes to me and say, hey, we're applying to independent school, I am going to say, I need you to do your research because you're going to make this decision from an informed standpoint. So while you have come to me to say X school, and typically they come with me in mind with like a co-ed school, or sometimes it's a single gender school, especially if you're from the Caribbean. I think families from the Caribbean, who, if they, back in the Caribbean, you attended a single gender school. If you went to an all girls or an all boys school, they're like, yes, I love the uniform. I love that structure. That's what I'm looking
100%.
for. And so I always encourage families to go look at single gender school and co-ed school.
Yes.
Right? Go ask questions, take a look at the curriculum, and I think that happened for you and your family.
We didn't single all girls schools, and I went to all boys school. All girls schools were not even on the radar. And we went. I fell in love.
Yes, you did.
I got my heart broken, but I'm happy where I'm at, though. I'm very 100% happy
Now-
because, and I'm going to be honest, I wasn't choosing for Ava. I was choosing for me because Daddy didn't want to deal with boyfriends and whatchamacallits and whatnot. But when we look at it in terms of Ava, her creativity and how she thinks outside the box, and what and Dalton is where she's going to be going. What they had to offer fit her personality more than where I wanted her to be, and people had to point that out to me, and I'm still hard-headed about it.
People being your wife.
Not just her.
Okay.
Her, my mother, my mother-in-law, her sisters, my brother-in-law.
It was a family committee.
They
the
all
family
jumped me.
committee came.
I got jumped. I did literally got jumped 100%. But I was wrong. Not that I was. I think wrong is the wrong word. I was looking at it from a selfish standpoint in terms of what I wanted in the school, not in terms of what was best for her in the school.
Yes. And I love that. I love that you got to have that debate and have this conversation,
Yes.
with your family. And when you say your heart got broken, just know that single all gender school, the girls' school, their heart was broken as well. So
Yes.
they were.
We
I said-
bonded. We bonded. 100%. We bonded.
Ava is fantastic and did very well in this admission process and had lots of choices.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
so when the other school said that she was not coming, they were heartbroken as well. So hearts were
I know.
broken on both ends. But that being said, the school that she's going to love her and she's going to be
Amazing
fantastic.
faculty. When we talk about representation and how much representation matters. And I think that's one of the reasons why we chose that school as well, is that she can see herself represented in the staff, which was very important to us as a family. 100%, definitely.
And this is what I love about ACES. I can sit here and talk about ACES all day because I love that families come to me saying, look, I have some ideas. I've heard about this process. I don't know. And then with a couple of months, we educate families. We hold your hand. We help you through this process. And then you have this newfound knowledge of all different types of schools, right? Because you visited and interviewed at various schools,
Lord.
uptown, downtown. Like now you have this entire knowledge base that you didn't have a year ago at this time.
Yeah, 100%.
And here you are beaming about a school that your daughter is going to after you've done intentional research and went through the process, and you are ecstatic.
Yeah,
And can't wait
100%.
for her to
Well,
start.
I didn't do the intentional research. Chris did the intentional research. I went by the feeling. 100% feeling. But like we went back and they looked at different schools, they looked at curriculum and everything like that. And that's, for us as men, that's why it's important to have the right partner in your life. I knew I wanted her to, like, based upon my mom and everything, she sent us to Catholic school, private school, and whatnot. I know I wanted the same thing for my daughter. But having a good woman behind you, and hopefully she never sees this, but it is so important. Like, she did a lot. And when I talk to other dads, it's the same thing. Like, we were here for support, and you guys, they do most of the legwork. Awesome.
Like, he that findeth a wife findeth a good thing. That was in the Bible, right?
Yes.
But I also say there's a lot of single families and single parents that I work with. And I'm intentional in helping them as well, right?
Yeah.
And just educating us all, because you're saying, like, man, I did this with a partner and it was daunting.
Yes.
So if you're doing this
By yourself.
Right? We are here. ACES is that other partner for you.
Yes, 100%.
ACES
And we
is that
still
other partner.
needed ACES with the two of us. As a matter of fact. No worries.
So then there's, again, the admission process. And then let's talk about money, because you can't talk about independent schools and not talk about money, because the reality is the tuition
You
at
gotta
an
pay it.
independent school is $65,000. Independent schools are tuition-based schools. They have their own governance. Right, governance. They don't receive any state funding. That's why they're not tied to any state testing or anything like that. So they're tuition-based school, similar to Catholic schools.
Yes.
Right? So whereas Catholic school, you have to pay a tuition to go there. Independent schools, there's a tuition to attend independent schools as well. With the tuition being upwards of $65,000 annually, for as early as kindergarten and pre-K. That is where sometimes Black and brown families sigh and say, ooh, this is not for me. And it is for you.
And this is where I want to go back to the whole DEI thing. I think for us, and why I say it's not a dirty word, it's because they want us here. And they, in some aspects, they need us in these schools. And some of these schools are very, very generous.
Yes. And a budget, like any school or any business. And another thing, I think as parents are looking for schools, whether it's public schools, Catholic schools, independent schools, at the core of these schools, they're businesses.
Yeah.
So I think everyone needs to understand that. And your child is attached to a dollar amount at any institution you go to. If it's at public school, the government's paying for your child. If it's at Catholic school, the government's paying for your child. I'm not Catholic school, charter schools.
Yeah.
Right? If it's a Catholic school, then your family is paying tuition. So there's a dollar amount assigned to your child, even if they're going to the local public school down the street, right? It's just you're not paying that dollar sign. The government is paying that dollar sign for you. And so with independent schools, there's a budget set aside for financial aid. And so every year, the schools, the head of school, their trustees, everyone comes up with the budget, and there's a budget for financial aid. So families complete a financial aid application to receive financial aid if they're admitted. It is need-based financial aid,
Yes.
right? Not merit. I think some schools, some families would say, well, they're going to give me a scholarship because my child is really smart, or my child And this is not, it is not merit based, it's need based. What that means is that why they have a financial aid application is because we need to get a full scope of your finances. And you sharing the information on your finances will help the school to give you a financial aid package that supports your needs, not the family next door to you, because the families next door or the family that's applying, their financial needs may be different from
Maybe
yours.
slightly different.
And so that's what families need to understand. So like, yes, there's an admission process, an application, and then there's a financial aid application as well that requires an application. And if a family is to submit additional documents, W-2s, 1040 tax forms.
Yeah. And they use a separate company for that process, so they don't see your.
Correct. And so for most schools, the admission and the financial aid are separate, right? They separate. They talk to each other sometimes at the very end, but not sort of like during the process. And that varies through schools. And so, yes, there's a different financial aid application. There are, I would say, 4 different types of financial aid applications. And so schools tend to decide which financial aid applications they're going to use. And in New York specifically, we talk about New York, there's one financial aid application that's fairly new. And that's the one that a lot of schools have transition to use because it is much simpler than what we've seen in the past.
Okay.
But again, this is all a part, again, when I say all of this, is that daunting process, right? Because as working parents and you're going through this process for your child, you are not doing admissions application, you're doing interviews, you write your parent statement or answer the questions on the application regarding your child and family, and then you're taking time to tour the schools and to go to open house because we want you to get a sense of which school and
best fit for you.
Just what's best for you, and also in terms of just knowing about the curriculum. And then you have to do the financial aid. And then there's a whole waiting game that happens after you go through it. So it's about a 4-month, 5 months intentional, like active process from the parents of like getting all the steps and all the requirements. And then there's a lull. And I said that lull usually comes right around the holidays when you're done with, the parents are done with their process. And then the schools have to review all the applications and go into their committee process. And then decisions for New York schools typically come out in February.
Awesome. Let's take a pause real quick. So we're talking about admissions. All right, cool. We continue. So we're so the waiting game part, I think is the kind of was the hardest part for us. Yes. And like I'm super competitive. And I looked at it in terms of winning. And I went in and I heard parents got accepted to 12 schools, some got accepted to 5 schools. And I wanted to be accepted to each one of the schools, even though I didn't want to go there. But I think that for me was kind of like the most daunting and most fun part, especially since I think we won pretty well.
So let's talk about that competitive piece, because that's usually the piece that I have to talk to families the most about once we get to like January, February. Because there is a piece of this that parents want to collect admissions. There's this bragging rights. My child got into X school. And I'm like, your child can only go to one.
Okay.
Your child can only go to one school. And also what parents don't tend to think in mind when this competitive piece come in is that with every acceptance that your child receive, if they're applying for financial aid, that is money attached to your child.
Yes.
And so for your one child to have 12 acceptances, right? And look, if they deserve it, rightfully so, yes, right? But for a child to hold on to 12 acceptances with 12 award packages that they're not going to use all 12.
Yes.
This is where I say community. And you have to think about that other child that's waiting, who didn't get 12, who didn't even get one.
Yeah.
And so waiting for that process, right? So there is that piece. So I always tell parents, your child is fantastic. They're great. Guess what? The school loves your child, right? would you like me to put it on a piece of paper for you? So that is like your.
But we were
your
we were intentional with ours, and we let
Right.
go every school except for two
Yes.
because somebody held on to the last minute, went to the whatchamacallit to try to convince other people that this was the right spot.
No, you guys were fantastic, and we talk about that, and so parents were like, if you're watching this, like, what is that process like?
Yeah, yeah.
In February, when the admissions decisions are revealed and it's notified, some families, like your family, was fortunate because and deserving. I would say it was a fortune, but deserving, because Ava was fantastic to receive multiple offers. And that is where I taught to my families to say, this is fantastic. I want you to celebrate. Here are the days you get to celebrate and like champion that and tell everyone, shout it to the moons. And then by this date, you need to release some schools that you know that you're not going to.
Yeah.
Because the releasing of the schools for your process, when you release, allows the admission office to move to their wait list. Because some kids are on a wait list.
Yeah.
Right? So this admission notification, there are 3 different possible outcomes that can happen once you apply to school. It's congratulations, you've been admitted. It's at this time we've decided to waitlist you, or we regret to tell you this is not the right school for you at this time.
Yeah. And to be honest, the year before, like we tried the process by ourselves, just trying to go in and we apply for we were waitlisted, and we held on for the whole year, keep with our fingers crossed, and we hopefully somebody released the spot, but they didn't, and we came back and we did the process again. So it wasn't like if we won and done it, we still had to come back and do the process. One thing I wanted to talk about as well, something that was big for me, was the whole reclassification thing.
Yes. So let's talk about that. September 1st is the birthday cutoff for most independent schools. Some independent schools, it's actually July 1st. New York, and I say New York because if you live in other parts of the country, Florida, Connecticut now, Jersey, has a different birthday cutoff because New York uses the calendar. They say January 1st to December 31st. Very few school districts will use that long of a calendar. Schools are saying the academic calendar, school starts September, or for some schools they start in August. We want your child to be 5 years old going into kindergarten at that time. Because New York has this swing, this flexible of those few months, parents aren't used to it when you tell them that about independent schools. And so if your child has a fall birthday, my daughter has a December 11th birthday. Her birthday is December 11th. And she attended her nursery school. Kids that, when they graduated from her nursery school, went to kindergarten. She was going to be 4 years old. She was 4 years old when we applied. She would be 4 years old September 1st.
Okay.
So that told us we had to apply to pre-K.
Got it.
So my daughter reclassified in pre-K. Now the kids have no idea, right, what that means. She didn't learn about this whole reclassification in pre-K until she was in middle school. It's because it's ACES and it's a pandemic and we're locked down and I'm having Zoom calls and she's like, wait, what?
I was reclassified?
I was reclassed? I did pre-K twice? You didn't tell me. I'm just like, you had no idea.
Yeah.
So that's really what it is. It's independent schools have a September 1st birthday cutoff. When I talk with families who are relocating, say from Florida or something, they're like, oh, yeah, that's the same thing. It's not even a question about reclassifying. So when kids have this fall birthday and they think that they're going to kindergarten in a public school or in a Catholic or a charter school in New York, and I tell them, because you're not 5 by September 1st, you actually need to apply to kindergarten and do kindergarten again. There's this, you're leaving my child back. There's this whole, Black and brown families hold this whole leaving my child back and skipping my child as this badge of honor. And it's interesting because we can go back into history and talk about redshirting. And how families of color, white families, they took pride in redshirting their children
Yeah.
and making sure their kids were older
Yeah.
when they went to school.
It's interesting that you say that, because even when I think about Ava, when we did the process the year prior, Ava, a year from then to a year now, she's absolutely a totally different kid. Even her 5 months ago to now, she is completely different.
Yes. So kids mature at lightning speed. Some of them, not all, right? They're not all scripts. And you do see that maturity. And think about how that's going to play out when she starts school in September and what that looks like a year from now. So I always tell families, play long game. The education and the knowledge piece here, where I always try to explain to families when we think about reclassing, is that birthday. Independent schools have the September 1st birthday versus where public schools is a December 31st birthday. And sometimes children may be in classrooms and say this is a public school, and the teacher may say, X child needs more support. They need more help in whether it's reading, whether they're math. And sometimes that is where they're looking at a child with a fall birthday, say October, November, December birthday, because they're comparing that child to other kids in that class. And other kids in that class may have a January, February, March birthday, and they're months apart. I equate it to if a mom goes into a hospital and has a newborn, and that child is 2 days old.
Yeah.
You would never expect that newborn to hit the same milestones or do the same things as a 10-month-old.
No, not
But
at all.
yet we expect that of our children, even when it's third grade or fourth grade,
Yeah, yeah.
or even like kindergarten. I'm sorry, as young as like, kindergarten, when they're like 3 years old or 4 years old. So when we're thinking about reclassing, I tell parents, think about what's best for your child. There's also this piece, I think, sometimes where we don't want to say our child is reclassing because we have to tell our family members. And that's where it's like, it's not even about your kid right now. It's really about you, your ego, your family members.
100% it was my
Because they're
ego.
just like, oh, my child got left back. Like, you left your child back? You holding it? Why would you hold your child back? Your child is, they're smart. Yes. No one is not saying your child is not smart. And also, when we're having this conversation with our family, we are just looking at the academics. They're reading, they're doing this, they're going to be boarding class. If they're in boarding class, that's not the case. You have to think about the social emotional and how that shows up. And also, this is the beauty of visiting independent schools, because I also think that families are just used to, you go to school, there's one way of learning. So if your child is excelling and they're in a class where they're excelling, and those kids not, that child is going to be bored. Whereas independent schools really focus on differentiated learning. And so that means they have various ranges. So a math class, for instance, they don't just have one level, they have different levels.
Yeah.
And so if your child is excelling, guess what? You're not going to sit in a math class with your peers. You're going to sit in a math class with kids who academically in math are on the same math level as you.
Yeah.
So that's why the importance of going and visiting independent schools, because we just know schools to be the way we taught. So when math is being taught, when reading is being taught, it's reading time, everyone's reading the same book. We don't understand that in these independent schools, most of them, there's differentiation and kids are grouped according to their levels, although they're in the same grade, but your math teacher and your reading teacher and all those other resources can be different, even if you're in the same grade. So that's what we don't know about.
The funny thing is, on the school visit, I actually saw it in process. And that was one of the good things about going to all the visits and everything like this, because you actually see the process. And they were explaining that, not saying that the child is they have different needs. I think that's the best way to put it. And they pull kids aside, and it wasn't done in any way out of malice, but in order for them to catch up, and then also for those who are ahead. And I think one of the things that she said as well is that over time, teaching this way, everything all evens out. And the class, like you were saying before, the class is a class that sticks together. They all start to progress at the same pace, which is amazing.
For me, and I would say this, and I always say for me because I want to speak from the I perspective, the number one reason, the number one why, the number one advantage to going to independent school is the tremendous amount of resources these schools
100%.
have. You cannot deny the resources, hands down, that these schools offer your children. And from the extracurricular activities, from their theater program, visual arts, as you said, you went, it's like a maker space room,
Yeah.
to their sports facilities. You cannot also to the resources on the academic side, right? Learning specialists, math specialists, like everything that you would need, every sort of profession you need to make sure your child is learning and leaves that school as just a robust learner to meet their full potential is offered at an independent school.
Definitely.
They have the funds to do it.
Yeah.
That's why the
100%.
tuition costs so much.
You get what you pay for in life sometimes, you know?
I talk about that with some families when they're like, why do people want to do this? I would say, well, why do you want to drive a luxury car?
No,
Think about it.
no different. One thing that I wanted to touch on before you head out, I know you've done this for quite a while now, since 2017. Can you tell me a little bit of some of the horror stories? I know you have some good stories.
Horror stories.
Well, not necessarily. We don't want to see horror stories, but challenges.
Okay, so number one right now, especially within the past couple of years, because COVID did what COVID did, and it allowed a lot of children, a lot of parents to be home with their children and to see what their children were learning. And they're like, I don't like X school that my child is going to. So I have to say, COVID, like a lot of business, revealed so much was revealed during COVID, right? And ACES grew because parents was like, I need a different school for my child. So right now, the heartbreaking thing for me is those families that are applying to grades that are called attrition. And we're waiting for a family leave and for a space to open up, and it doesn't happen. Like we have a child right now, just wonderful. The school was like, this child is fantastic and wonderful. But when you get to those off entry gates, sometimes it's seats, and if the child is applying for financial aid, sometimes it's now you're thinking of a seat and a financial aid package to be available for those off entry years, right? So that's what's really challenging right now. It's hard because I'm like, no, you want this child, and they're like, we do. I'm like, yes, please, and like hoping that it'll happen for the child.
Yeah.
But those two things have to be aligned. That is why I'm like, don't miss entry points.
Yes. And what's entry points again? It's kindergarten,
6th grade, sometimes 5th grade, depending on the school, and 9th grade.
Okay.
Those are the big entry points.
No worries.
Another thing we didn't touch upon, and I feel like we should come back and do a whole series on this, and I would love to do that.
Definitely.
I want to talk about boarding schools.
Oh, yeah. Because you mentioned boarding schools and it scared the living bejesus out of me. I'm just getting over the whole... well, no, actually, I'm accepting of that, but I'm getting over the whole thought of sending my child away. And I'm biased because we did it to the boy and he didn't like it. Now I'm like, how are we going to do this to the girl? And she's a girl. I know it's a little sexist and whatnot, but you think about you. And as a dad, as a girl dad, my daughter being out there by herself, it's a whole nother realm.
Okay, so this is why we're talking. One, when your child goes to boarding school, they are not by themselves. Actually, if their child goes to boarding school, they're with so many adults, more than if they were at home with you. That's one. Two, boarding school starts, there's some junior boarding schools, right, that would start earlier, but typically boarding schools, upper school, 9th grade, 10th grade.
Okay.
There's this big myth for Black and brown families that boarding school is where you send your child because they're being bad.
Finishes school.
Right. That is not the case at all. I think we don't know about boarding school, and we need to learn more about boarding schools because it is actually for some children the best option for them. I think about kids who are latchkey kids. I think about those parents who sometimes you have your child going to a school, it's not the school you want them to go to. It's not in the best environment. I think about those parents who are just working multiple jobs and they don't have the time to literally be there for their children. Boarding schools, you will have your advisors, you have your dorm parent, you have your teachers, you have your counselors. When I tell you there are so much adults on your child,
Yeah.
it's like it's more than what you would have in your house.
Got it.
And there's this notion of I can't send my child away. I don't think we think about it sending your child away. Your child is going to school to learn,
Yeah.
and while you don't see them every day, you get to communicate and talk to them every day. And I think sometimes that's actually more meaningful because some parents equate to, well, they're home, right? Why? Because you're at work and you're okay with just them knowing that you're home.
Yeah.
And it's like passing in a win. Whereas if they're at boarding school and you're talking to them, it's more intentional. They're like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I'm going, visiting week and things like that. So we can definitely come back to talk more about boarding schools. I often think about some of our beautiful children who are in juvenile detention. And I always think, what if? What if they had a different circumstances?
Yeah.
What if there was a time where instead of going to X school or being around X neighborhood, we took them out the neighborhood and we put them into a school where it was cool to be smart.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? A school where, I mean, the resources, again, sports, arts, where they're exposed to so much. The Jamaican in me, I'm always going to be the Caribbean piece.
Yeah, same.
The devil give idle people work to do. It's sort of like sometimes these kids are just idle because they have so much time on their hands.
Yeah, 100%.
But what if you gave them an opportunity for them to try different things and expose them to something and just open them up? So there's a part of me that's always like, we need to talk more in our community about boarding schools and let go of this, I can't let my child go, and know that you are setting up your child for success and what that looks like.
100%. And I want to thank you personally because, I want to thank you and I want to thank Chris personally because of the eye-opening experiences in terms of all-girls schools, in terms of opening our horizon to checking out as many schools as possible. And, it's still in the back of my head. And I was even thinking about it a couple of weeks ago when you mentioned boarding schools. And you said, we were all together in the community where you said, if you think that independent schools are crazy, their facilities, wait till you check out these boarding schools. So she's far away off. She's only 5. I'm still holding on. I don't even want her to turn 6 right now or 7 or become a teenager. I'm still fathoming these things. But, whatever is the best situation for her to make her the best human being that she can be, we're definitely open to that 101%. I kind of really want to wrap up and just tell us, how can we get to know ACES? Where can we locate you? And we're going to have all that information down in the description and on the screen as well. But just tell us, where can we find you?
You can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram at ACES_admissions. And then our website is acesadmissions.com. And you can also just Google us and find us and give us a call. Yeah. And we are happy to talk to you and educate you about the independent school admission process. And I also want to say that we need to share information. ACES motto is each one teach one. Yeah. All of us are in some sort of community. And the piece where we are missing with independent schools, or so like we're just learning about independent schools because we're not talking about it within our community. I want us to start talking about education. I want us, when we have these baby showers and we have these events and we have these barbecues, like, let's carve out some time to talk about, well, what does education look like for X child? Yeah. And where is your child at school? So that we can be prepared. Because I would say, like, there are some other families, they have this conversation when their kids are in the womb, right? Yeah. Now, because of that eye-open experience for me, I had this conversation with my partner when my child was in the womb, right?
Yeah.
But I knew before I even met my partner that I wanted her to go to an independent school. I wanted my unborn children to go to an independent school. So I just say having the knowledge before is essential, but I want us to have these conversations because even again, if we're having these conversations from when they're young, right? And you get to that teenage phase and you have a child that's like, they're not listening or X with school or X that, it's like, okay, but why don't we as a community come together to help that family, right? To say, well, hey, you heard about boarding school? How about we go look at this? How about we go look at that? So I just think I want us to be more intentional about helping each other and having conversations that's going to progress us.
100%.
When we gather, we need
100%.
to do that as a people, as a community. We need to do that for each other.
Yeah. And I think that's the one thing that I appreciate too, is that ACES is a community. And although we've gotten to the first step in where we want to go, for us and for the Watkins family, we want to still be part of that community. And anything that you have, anytime, any opportunity that we have to contribute to the ACES community, we are more than welcome to call upon us. And I just volunteered Chris, and she's going to hate me, but still, we're more than welcome to call upon us. And I know she would agree with me to be part of that community. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Latoya.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And I want to say a special thank you to all of my ACES partner schools. So you'll see them listed on our social media. Our ACES partner schools are integral to what we do at ACES. We had a big ACES Kids Carnival and Parent Mixer community event, and our partner schools sponsored that event, right? They underwrote all aspects of that event for us. We want to continue to have that event every year. We want families just to come out and, alum families now,
Yes,
and
thank you.
talk to families who are new in independent schools. So I can't thank our ACES partner schools enough, because them just being in partnership with us help us to bring events like that to community, and also even our celebration event brunch that we have. So
Oh, yeah, that was
thank
amazing.
you to our ACES partner schools. You are an integral part of everything we do at ACES to educate families and also to make sure families are prepared when they enter your school, as we have a new Sharon this year entering, and I'm not going to say the school. I'll let you say the school.
Well, I was gonna wear my hat today, but I've been wearing it so much, my Dalton hat, that it's over there in the corner right now. It's getting a little beaded and tattered. I'm trying to make that hat last 12 years because I want to say this is the hat from the beginning to the end.
Dalton, we got to get him a new hat. We'll get you a new hat. It's okay. They don't mind you wearing out the Dalton hat.
No worries, but thank you so much. Thank you, Latoya. This is Natasha Watkins, your favorite realtor out here on Long Island. We'll see you again soon. We're out of here. Peace.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a
You're
pleasure.
welcome.